let's get started with a story. Once upon a time, a royal leader looked upon their kingdom and realized that their treasures were spread far and wide. It was difficult to locate their crown jewels, and many of their other profitable trinkets were squirreled away in unexpected places. How is one to wear a beautiful necklace if it's stuck in a jeweler's desk drawer on the other side of town? The leader was wise, and they knew it would take some ingenuity and solid strategy to retrieve their treasures and store them in a secure place that could be accessed by all who needed them. Probably sounds a little familiar. Let's see where this goes. First, the leader spoke with their most trusted advisors and many common citizens to learn how the kingdom's treasures were currently being used. So how can you learn about your users' current behavior? Ask. Survey your future users. And by the way, if you haven't determined who the dam is for and you're picking out a dam, you're a little bit getting ahead of yourself. Most common places, emailing someone else, and those attachments take up a lot of storage space, by the way, especially because everyone who has it now has a separate one stored. A shared drive, SharePoint, Drive, OneDrive, internal server, what have you. We review folder structures a lot within our just advising and professional services, and we see a lot of pain points related to structures that don't make sense outside of the team that created them. Slack, yes, sadly, Slack. Internet searches. Weep softly, prepares the legal team for the inevitable fallout. So the leader searched far and wide across the entire kingdom to learn about where treasures were currently hidden. The leader learned about many duplicates of their treasures and even some systems that they didn't realize they were still paying for. So find out every place where your assets are currently living. Where is their duplication? Storage can include hard drives, agencies that are storing assets on your behalf. Check your contracts for this. Old storage solutions that may not have been fully sunset. People's local machines. Oh, Alice has that. Email her. Or just ping her on Slack, and now it's being stored in Slack. So many things. So let's get back to the story. The leader learned much about what was causing the most pain about the current state and what their people wished for the future. It was a conversation of healing and hope for the future, and it drummed up enthusiasm for the new solution. Strategic goals can inform timeline and how you proceed. I always recommend considering pain points and goals when making any decisions about the dam. So here's some common pain points. Using the wrong file. That wrong file can open you up to risk at worst, or at least mean the branding is inconsistent. This is particularly important if you're going through a major organizational shift and your asset management solution is part of the strategy. Make sure your branding is consistent, and this can help. Search issues. When you're doing your, when you're planning for your migration, understanding how search is an issue currently can impact how you proceed with your migration. The access is wrong. People can't access the assets they actually need, or they're seeing irrelevant assets or things they just shouldn't be using in their search results. So goals. Timeline is always a big one. Current state of your metadata, what the scope and scale of your duplicate assets is. It can save budget to trim down what you have before migrating it to another paid solution. So we'll talk a little bit more of that. that later. What did that leader do next? The leader worked with their most trusted advisors to align the new treasury with their hopes for their kingdom. They found that there were many trinkets that hadn't been used in a long time or were unusable. Those were destroyed or placed in a special archive where the storage cost less. So it's important to consider what will be in scope for the dam before migrating everything over. Although, if timeline is tight enough, you may not have a choice. And it's good to know that ahead of time. If you have the option, consider cheaper storage within that new solution. That really makes everything much more streamlined and much more manageable for both your end users and your administrators if there's a one-stop shop. Frequently, we refer to this option as cold storage, and that's good for assets that you need to keep, but you're not planning on using regularly. Usually there's a little bit of a time delay in retrieving assets from cold storage, so that's a consideration as well. It's good to know now if you're planning to include work in progress or WIP files, as that's going to inform your scope and what can be, understanding what can be reused. What do you want to repurpose? Everybody's needs are different. These are some pretty common ways to divvy up your assets. So things that you'll keep: final assets available for use, and you'll want to prioritize in your migration anything that needs to be used immediately. Those first users in the dam, what do we need to prioritize? Templates for reusing things, or that you're going to reuse and you want to provide. We have an option called Print UI where you have templates and then you have source assets and you can control things really well. And again, it's that one-stop shop that can streamline things and make it easier to manage it too. So again, those source assets for the creative team, you want to make sure that you're keeping. If you have stock photography, obviously keep that, but double check if you still own it or make sure that you understand how long you can use it. And keep that in mind when you're planning this out. Common examples of things to be archived: older assets that shouldn't be used, your assets that are being kept long-term. Some folks will want to have a full archival strategy within their dam, which I always support, especially if the team that's responsible for your dam is also responsible for your archive, or if you have a different team, they can manage that, that cold storage and make sure that the metadata makes sense for long-term digital preservation. Things you want to exclude: assets that should never be used. There are some situations, particularly for archival things, where you need to keep track of that. Some examples include building metadata-only records that indicate that something was destroyed for legal reasons. That can be very helpful to manage in there. Or if you want to track it, because I worked with a CPG company that had a very long history and a very large portfolio of brands. They had assets that they didn't want to ever use, but they knew at some point they might be helpful for research purposes, or there may come a time when those would be helpful. So, for that kind of archive, an archivist is going to have a little bit of a different perspective from, say, a marketing director or a finance team or a legal team. And they're going to want to both lock down those assets. They don't need to pay for full hot storage, but they also want to track additional metadata that is specific to those kinds of assets. And again, your dam digital preservation takes a lot off your hands. You don't have to perform the fixity checks. You don't have to manage, checksums or anything like that. That's going to be handled particularly by a cloud solution. All of the big names will do that for you. But if you're on-prem, that's a different story. So let's get back to the story. The leader understood that some of their current storage locations would need to be shut down or closed as part of the move to the new treasury. They spoke with the leaders of those locations and struck deals for safely extracting their treasures. Check your contracts with these solutions. Get a handle on formatting. Make sure you understand how your metadata is going to be exported and see how that's going to translate into your new dam. Common questions to also ask your current vendor. And by the way, if you don't have clarity, but you don't want to spook your current vendors, you can get clarity from them and blame it on an audit by your legal team or something else that would allow you to ask the necessary questions while maintaining your current relationship. Only you are going to know if you need that kind of tap dancing, but there are ways. So asking some questions like, if we need to remove large batches of assets and their metadata, what formats are available? A lot of times they'll work with you on this. Occasionally, I've seen some really weird things. There was an example, this is kind of a worst case scenario. They had received a Word document with screenshots of each image. It was photography, and the metadata in a little prose paragraph at the bottom. So that was borderline impossible to parse systematically. And it's good to know if you're going to be trudging through that before you have to start planning timelines, frankly. Can you move the assets directly can you port it directly over into another storage space? Is there a cost for that? Typically, yes. Not everyone. Not everyone charges for that, but it is pretty common. Questions to ask your new vendor. Make sure you're considering this and talking to vendors that you're looking at. If you've already signed with a vendor, make sure you're having this conversation as early on as possible. Have you migrated from these organizations before? Because a lot of times they have. So it's always good to ask. If you've got multiple sources, understanding the most efficient way to do this, take advantage of the experience of your onboarding team, and make sure that your plan and your timeline, especially that you're delivering to leadership, is executable. Back to the story. And so the royal leader and their trusted advisors devised a strategy to keep a certain set of assets and defined a list of asset types that could be kept in their new treasury. So their future jewels could be stored properly. They're always buying more jewels. And now that they knew what they wanted to store in their treasury, it was time to plan out exactly how they do it. So our next session and the next chapter of our leader's story will be about managing the migration. You have a plan now. How do you execute on it? So let's build a migration roadmap. That is the end of our story for now. I am available if you have any additional questions after this. We're open for questions now. We've got some time, but you can always reach out to me later. And your Media Ballet representative can always help as well and can funnel things to me if needed. So with that, let's take some questions. Oh, we're going to do the second poll now. Let's do the second poll. See where you are now. So are you going to get your happily ever after? I hope so. And what do you need in order to do it? Okay, now we can open up to questions. Okay. The first one is, can you talk more about what gets kept on your dam? At the very least, you want to include assets that you want to share across teams or even the whole company. Pretty common assets for enterprise-wide would be logos, brand guides, stock photography, documents. Internal photography is a pretty common one, team photos or events, sales collateral, archives. Obviously, I talked a lot about that. Custom photography. Vendors love being able to slip in, upload an entire shoot in one go, and sign off with some brief notification to you, letting you know that it's done. Really, anything you want repurposed should go in the dam. WIP assets can also be in a dam, as I mentioned, but you should make sure you document a workflow for receiving them and managing them. So, all major use cases should have a documented workflow, but particularly with this, as part of your governance, you want to make sure that you're documenting workflows and making sure that you are sharing those so that everybody's on the same page about your expectations. Other questions? How do you not know about a system you're paying for? People have lives and lots of things to manage during their workday. Hopefully it isn't common, but I have seen this. Such an interesting moment to witness that journey of feelings. Disappointment in the team who didn't take that last step over the finish line to sunset the project or the product. Sadness at the money lost, joy at the budget restored to go towards something that would actually get used. You can check with your procurement team and whoever handles your budget to see if something is being earmarked for being spent on other things. That's how some other organizations have found it. I know of at least 2, so now I add this to the list to discuss. How is Slack used to manage documents? Kind of in the same way that email is, like, really used to be, but sometimes still is, managed to back up documents, but slightly better. People will pin things. I did not consider this until I did a survey. I am the DAM administrator for Media of LA, of course. And I did a survey early on when I first took over, and someone had written in the other notes, we use Slack. You learn. This is why you do the survey, so that you can learn. So I will be culling assets from Slack, which is great. Additional questions? Any tips to have people in your team gather their assets? Yeah. I usually recommend kind of a call to action for your teams. Make sure that leadership is supportive. They can really help with that. Other ways that you can do that would be, part of the survey, you can include, like, where are you storing your assets? Are you willing to talk to us about where you're storing your assets? That would be a good one. And I'm just going to double down on making sure leadership is supportive of how you're doing this. Some flattened organizations don't really lean on top-down change management, but in that case, you kind of have to go group to group and do a little bit of a road show. And again, your survey is going to be helpful with this, kind of planting the seed of that. But if you do have more of a hierarchical org structure, getting people ahead up top of the chain on board so that they can encourage, and in some organizations, it's mandatory. So that's some good ways to do that. Any other questions? I'll give you one more moment to gather thoughts. All right. No more questions. So let's go ahead and save you a few minutes and close up. Just one last time, we are available. I'm available to answer anything that you think of later. I'm always happy to help. You will have access to a recording of this, and we will send out a version of the slide deck so that if you didn't take notes, you've got those questions. And thank you, everyone, for a great session. See you next time.